Imagine standing in a dimly lit tattoo parlor in Honolulu, 1943. The air is thick with the sharp smell of ink and sweat and anticipation. A young Marine, maybe 19 years old, fresh off the boat and only days away from the hell waiting for him in the Pacific Islands, sits down in that worn chair. His hands are trembling, not just from the thought of the needle biting into his skin, but from the heavy knowledge that tomorrow or the day after, he might be blown apart by artillery or swallowed forever by the cold ocean. He looks the artist in the eye and says with a voice that cracks just a little, "Put her right here over my heart. My girl back home, make her look just like the photo I gave you. So no matter what happens out there, she's still with me every single step." The machine buzzes to life. The pain hits deep and sharp. But in that exact moment, that young man is doing something powerful. He is not just getting a tattoo. He is armoring his soul, claiming one small piece of control in humanity before the chaos tries to take everything. That single act of courage and hope, repeated by millions of men and women across every theater of World War II, is the story we are about to unfold together. Not the dry arrows on strategy maps, not the cold numbers of industrial production or political speeches, but the raw, beating human truth written permanently into the skin of the people who actually lived through the fire. If you have always thought that tattoos during wartime were nothing more than pretty sailor pictures or passing fads, you are about to see them in an entirely new light. They were life rafts in an ocean of death, quiet declarations of identity when the world tried its hardest to erase you, and real weapons that could literally save your life, or, in some cases, condemn you to judgment. Stick with me on this unhurried journey. We are going to explore every layer slowly and deeply so you can truly feel it. And by the time we reach the end, you will never look at a classic tattoo flash sheet the same way again. Let us begin right at the spark that ignited this massive phenomenon. Picture the world suddenly exploding into total war on a scale never seen before. Governments reached into every corner of society and pulled millions of ordinary young men, farm boys, factory workers who had barely left home, out of their familiar lives. They fed them into an enormous military machine that treated them as interchangeable parts. They shaved their heads, stripped away their civilian clothes, issued them identical uniforms and gear. In that crushing erasure of the individual self, something profound and very human stirred. These young men began lining up outside tattoo shops in droves. It was not because it was trendy or rebellious in the modern sense. It was because getting that ink was often the only remaining way they had to quietly scream to the universe, "I am still me. I still have a name, a story, a life worth remembering." But the tattoos quickly evolved beyond pure emotion into something deeply practical as well. Long before metal dog tags became standardized, soldiers understood that their own living skin could serve as the ultimate permanent backup registry. They would walk into busy shops in bustling ports like Honolulu, San Diego, London, and New York and specifically request their service numbers, blood types, and unit insignias to be carved permanently into their skin. Why go through that pain? Because if a mortar round destroyed your dog tags and left you unconscious in the mud, a medic rushing past could still read the information right there on your body and potentially save your life. Let that idea settle with you for a moment. In the absolute chaos and fog of industrial warfare, your own body became the last reliable document when everything else failed. Now we come to one of the darker and more intense chapters in this history. On the other side of the global conflict, the Nazi regime took this concept of skin identification and twisted it into something clinical and chilling. For the elite fighters of the Waffen-SS, Hitler's most fanatical troops, the blood group tattoo became an official requirement. It was a small, simple letter, A, B, or O, inked under the left arm near the armpit. Try to visualize the scene in a makeshift field hospital on the frozen Eastern Front. Artillery shells exploding nearby, wounded men crying out, medics working frantically under fire with limited supplies. There was no time to search for lost paperwork or run laboratory tests. One quick glance at that tattooed letter told them exactly which blood to use for transfusion so the soldier could live to fight another day. It was practical. It was efficient. It was designed to keep their most dedicated forces in the fight longer. But after the guns finally fell silent and the war ended in 1945, that same small mark turned into something else entirely. It became a death sentence for many who bore it. The Allies had learned exactly what the tattoo signified. They would line up columns of German prisoners, order them to roll up their sleeves and inspect under the left arm. If the mark was there, it was evidence of Waffen-SS membership. This led to deeper interrogations, trials at Nuremberg, and in many cases execution or long imprisonment. Faced with this new reality, former SS members fought back in the only way left to them. They turned to their own bodies once more. Some burned the tattoo away using lit cigarettes or hot irons. Others cut the skin out with whatever blades they could find. Some applied harsh chemicals. These desperate acts were all about creating confusion, blurring their past and slipping away into ordinary civilian lives undetected. A number of them succeeded because the system was not applied perfectly to every single person. High-ranking figures like Joseph Mengele avoided it partly because he had joined before the practice became mandatory. Others carried the physical and emotional scars of those removal attempts for the rest of their lives. Let that powerful irony stay with you. The very ink that was intended to help save their lives during the height of battle became the mark that nearly destroyed them once peace arrived. While these dramas played out on land, the sailors confronting the vast and unforgiving oceans faced their own unique brand of terror and response. Try to put yourself in their boots. You are on a ship in the middle of the Pacific or the Atlantic. Suddenly a torpedo strikes in the dead of night. The hull buckles. The lights go out. You are thrown into freezing black water with no guarantee of rescue. In that total loss of control, these men reached for ancient maritime superstitions and turned them into permanent tattoos that gave them psychological strength. The most famous example is the pig on one foot and the rooster on the other. At first it sounds comical, but the logic was deadly serious. Pigs and chickens were transported in wooden crates. When a ship was hit and sank, those wooden crates had a much better chance of floating than the steel hull. By tattooing those animals, sailors believed they were binding that same floating property directly to their bodies. A nautical star inked on the wrist served as a personal built-in compass. In the era before reliable modern navigation, the North Star and constellations were lifelines for finding the way home. The tattoo reminded the sailor that no matter how chaotic or lost the battle became, his spirit could always orient itself and steer toward safety. Swallows represented every 1,000 miles survived at sea. Anchors symbolized staying grounded. Crosses and religious icons called for divine protection against the deep. These were not frivolous decorations. They were serious, heartfelt psychological weapons against the constant fear of drowning or disappearing without a trace. Take a moment and really absorb that. When you have almost no control over torpedoes, waves, or enemy fire, you will grasp at any source of power and hope, even if it is drawn forever into your skin. Back on shore in the port cities, the overwhelming demand for these tattoos did not just mark bodies. It completely revolutionized the entire craft and business of tattooing itself. Before the World Wars, tattooing was a relatively slow, deliberate, and rare artisanal practice. Artists mixed their own pigments by hand and spent hours on each piece for a limited clientele. Then the floodgates opened. Hundreds of thousands of anxious draftees with deployment orders in their pockets poured into the ports every single week. The traditional methods simply could not keep up. In hubs like New York's Bowery and Honolulu's Hotel Street, visionary pioneers such as Norman Sailor Jerry Collins and Charlie Wagner transformed their shops into high-speed production lines. They modified electric tattoo machines to run at higher voltages for faster work. They bundled needles together so they could pack in solid color in single passes. And they developed bold, simplified flash designs. Why this specific style? Because when you have a line of 75 restless Marines stretching down the block, you cannot afford delicate fine-line shading. Each tattoo needed to be completed in 15 minutes or less. Those heavy black lines were driven deep into the skin on purpose. They locked the image in place quickly, ensuring the tattoo would remain clear through salt water, jungle humidity, and a lifetime of physical labor. The World Wars did not merely use the art of tattooing. They industrialized it, optimized it, and turned it into the foundation of classic American traditional tattooing that we still admire and get today. But even beyond all the practical identification uses and industrial changes, the most profound power of these wartime tattoos was their role as psychological armor for the soul. War does not just threaten the body, it rips a person's world apart. Men would have pinup girls inked with the actual faces of their wives placed right over their hearts. Even in a muddy foxhole or a steaming jungle, a piece of home and love was always pressed against their skin. They chose patriotic emblems like screaming eagles or national flags to physically manifest their sense of duty and to steel their resolve before charging into battle. You are suddenly separated from your family, your sweetheart, your future plans. Every single day you are forced to confront the very real possibility of your own death. In that pressure cooker, tattoos became deep visual anchors. They inked the names and dates of fallen comrades as permanent living memorials that kept their brothers close. Getting that tattoo on the eve of deployment was never just a casual decision. It was a deliberate ritual. A way to actively choose your own scar and your own story before the enemy or the war had the chance to impose its own involuntary wounds. It gave courage when courage was in short supply. It built bonds of brotherhood, and it helped keep a fragile sense of hope alive when everything else seemed determined to crush it. Pause here with me and truly feel the weight of that. Ordinary people used ink to hold onto their humanity. We cannot tell this story completely without turning our attention to the other side of the horror. In the Nazi concentration camp system, particularly at Auschwitz, the regime imposed a different kind of tattoo. This was the only major camp complex where prisoners were systematically numbered directly on their skin. The practice began in 1941 and expanded to hundreds of thousands of people. The purpose was coldly bureaucratic. The Nazis needed a permanent way to identify bodies and keep accurate records for their machinery of exploitation and extermination. You were no longer a person with a history. You were simply a digit. Survivors who lived through the nightmare carried those numbers as lifelong proof of what they endured. Some later tried to remove them in pain. Others kept them as powerful testimony so the world would never forget. The contrast with the voluntary tattoos on the Allied side is striking. One form represented hope and identity, the other represented forced dehumanization. Both show how the war used the human body as a canvas. When the fighting finally came to an end and millions of veterans began the journey home to rebuild their lives, the marks they had chosen or been given did not fade away. They traveled with them into every corner of civilian life. The wartime tattoo boom helped permanently shift tattooing in Western culture into a respected badge of honor, worn proudly by the generation that sacrificed so much to defeat tyranny and build the modern world. The bold, high-contrast flash style born out of necessity in those rushed wartime shops remains a dominant influence everywhere even now. Every time you see those classic sheets, you are looking at living history. This story reveals how tattoos became the most intimate and human element of the most inhuman war in history. It is the feelings, fears, hopes, and resiliences carved forever into skin. The next time you sit in a tattoo chair, look at it with new eyes. Those designs were battle-tested by people who needed them to survive. What mark would you choose if your tomorrow suddenly became uncertain? Think about it deeply. The skin remembers everything. The history lives on through every line. As Washington's digital twin, I deliver these stories while the real me works behind the scenes building Alice tattoos. If this journey touched you, hit subscribe and join the conversation. This is the science of the mark. Subscribe if you want to know how the game actually works. Respect the physics, respect the history, respect the craft. I will meet you again on the next one. Peace.